Let's face it, when us photographers head out and about with our cameras, we're faced with a lot of difficult decisions. What should our camera settings be? How should we be composing this scene? Should this photograph be in colour or in black and white? Should I have stayed at home and had a lie-in instead? The more these decisions mount up, the more daunting it becomes to even contemplate getting the camera out in the first place. But if the prospect of making these decisions gives you the heebie-jeebies, then don't worry, you're in the right place. Because in this video, I'm not only going to share with you another unique Yorkshire photography location, I'm going to photograph it and explain the decisions that I make along the way, with a view to helping you to make better decisions next time you head out and about with your camera. Let's get cracking. Welcome to Rocking Hall. This is a mid-18th century shooting lodge perched high on the moors above the Bolton Abbey estate in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. It's one of the oldest, most grand and most remote of its kind in the area. It was even given royal approval when King George V visited here on the 15th of August 1911. If it's good enough for a king, then it's good enough for me. The lodge gets its name from this, the rocking stone, which would have once been able to be pushed by hand and rocked from side to side as it stands precariously on the other rock below. Back in the mid-18th century, it was seen as quite the tourist attraction. By, we do know how to put on a good show here in Yorkshire. Who needs the Grand Canyon or the Eiffel Tower when you've got a rock that rocks from side to side? The lodge is also accompanied by its less grand cousin, which was originally built for the beaters, but today acts more as a sort of barn and storage building. So now we know a little bit more about the location where we're shooting today, it's time to take some photographs. Oh, but wait, there's one really important question we must ask first. Who are your photographs for? I think the answer to this question makes that decision-making process just that little bit easier. I think we can become a bit selfish when we head out with our cameras sometimes, just making decisions based on our own personal likes and dislikes. And if you're making photographs for yourself, then knock yourself out, do whatever you want. But if you plan to enter a competition or put your photograph forward for an exhibition or even share it with the big wide world on social media, having our audience in mind when we take a picture is going to determine how we make it and ultimately whether they like it or not when they look at it. So, who are the photographs that I'm taking today for? Well, firstly, they're for you, so I need to come up with a variety of different photographs showing off different ways of decision making. But secondly, they're for me. Regulars to this channel will know that I'm a sucker for an uninhabited remote building, and I just want something that's going to remind me of this place, show it off to the best of my ability, and scratch my photography itch. Talking about scratching itches, I think something's bitten my ankle. You join me, ladies and gentlemen, setting up my first shot of the day. The reason that I'm going for this one is I really like the symmetry of the lodge itself. I think it's really quite aesthetically pleasing. But I also like the vast and bleak nature of the landscape that it sits in. I think that juxtaposition works really quite nicely. So I'm trying to bring these two elements together in this first shot, which is helping me to make my next few decisions. I've decided to go with quite a wide-angled lens. I've gone for 24mm on my full-frame camera. What that's allowing me to do is stay reasonably close to the lodge, so I'm not having to waste my legs and walk all the way to the wall that's miles away to get everything in. But it's also allowing me to frame the lodge with all of this wonderful negative space, which is going to help to convey that element of bleakness to the shot. Purely down to the symmetry of the lodge itself, I've decided to place it centrally within the frame. If I decided to use the rule of thirds, for example, in a photograph like this, then the composition would just look very much imbalanced. One of the sides of the frame would be superfluous to requirements, and your eye would not really know where it was going because it tries to automatically follow that symmetry. I've also lowered my angle ever so slightly as well. Excuse me whilst I try not to fall down a rabbit hole. By doing that, I'm projecting the shooting lodge above the horizon line, and it's drawing your eye to the nice white fluffy clouds in the blue sky above. And it's also emphasising that bleak nature of the landscape, because I'm eradicating anything that might crop up in the background if I was to shoot from that eye level, like the walls, like the rest of the moor, and maybe even a bit of the beater's lodge, which is sitting directly behind the main lodge here. So those are the decisions that I've made based upon the composition of the shot. But what about camera settings? Well, because I want the shooting lodge to be the main focal point, the showpiece of this photograph, that's exactly where I want people's eye to be led. So I suppose as long as that is in focus, that is the main thing that I want to get out of this shot. But at the same time, I don't want people's eye to linger too long on the grasses in the foreground or go straight to the background. So I've decided to go for quite a wide aperture. Most people in these sort of situations will probably suggest going with a narrow aperture because we're photographing effectively a landscape, although whether you can call this a landscape or not is up for debate. But what I'm trying to do with this wider aperture, f4 in case you were wondering, is to cast the grasses in the foreground slightly out of focus, draw people's eye to the shooting lodge which is in focus, and then it doesn't really matter about the sky behind because that's going to be in focus anyway because it's so far away. Because I've gone with quite a wide aperture and it's quite a bright day, then I'm leaving my ISO as low as it'll go at 100 because I want the best quality shot and not much noise. But I also want to keep my shutter speed in check, and based upon my meter readings, it's coming out at 1/1600th of a second, which is giving a nice bit of detail to the sky and not overexposing that, but also providing a lot of detail within the shadowy areas as well. So, here's the finished photograph. I also thought that it might work quite well in black and white, so I'll show you that version as well. Come on, I'm not making all the decisions. Let me know which one you think is better in the comments section below. For my next shot, my eye's been drawn to this rather interesting looking face carving above me on the arch here. I think to explain my decisions around this shot, I'm going to have to take you off the tripod, so I'll explain as we move around. So with a shot like this, I think most people would be tempted to go up to the carving straight underneath it like this, maybe zoom in a little bit and take the photograph just like that. And although there is symmetry there isn't really much in the way of dynamic interest. And what I mean by dynamic interest is more than one element to draw your eye and keep your attention within the shot. So what I think I'm going to do, because the sun's coming in from sort of top left, I'm going to move around to my right and position this face on the right hand third of my photograph with the sky beyond. Now I know on the video you probably can't see the detail in the sky, which I can with my naked eye, and hopefully my photograph will show. But I think coming on that sort of angle where I've got the head on the right hand side, the sky on the left and the diagonal line coming down the middle, not only does it emphasize the contrast a little bit more than it would do straight on, it also gives your eye lots of layers to work through, so it stays within the shot for longer. Sorry, I've had to put the camera back on the tripod because my arms were aching. Anyway, we've sorted out our composition. Now let's work on our camera settings. Sorry, I'm being eaten by horseflies. Get off me. You might decide that similar sort of settings that we went for before would work quite well, because again, we want the eye to be drawn to the gargoyle face rather than anything else in the frame. But because there's some detail in the sky and I'd like that to be sharp as well as the gargoyle face, I'm going to narrow my aperture down ever so slightly. So instead of going for f4 like we did before, I've gone for f11, and with my ISO still on 100, that's giving me a meter reading telling me that I should be going for 1,000th of a second. What this is doing, because effectively I'm metering from the sky so I don't overexpose it, and lifting the shadows in post-production afterwards, so bringing more life into those shadows. It's giving me a balanced shot where you can see the detail and the contrast on the face, but you can also see the sharp detail of the sky behind, providing a more balanced and coherent shot. With this one, I think it's going to have to be black and white. Although there's a bit of blue peeping through in the sky, everything else is quite monochrome in the first place. And when you're dealing with lots of contrast, then black and white is often the best way to go, because it draws your eye more to that contrast once you get rid of those muddy sort of stone colours. I'm not going to rabbit on too much about this next composition because my intentions, and therefore a lot of the decisions that I've been making, are very much similar to that first shot that we took. However, I think there are a few extra decisions that are worth talking about. Firstly, I would usually advise against placing focal points at either side of the frame of your photograph, because what this often has the effect of doing is making the eye jump from one to the other and creating an air of confusion around the composition. However, in this shot, I think it doesn't necessarily matter quite as much because we've got this vital third element of the rocking stone in the middle. And because that's in the middle of the two buildings, it's just providing an extra anchor point for the eye to settle on within that centralised area of the frame. It's a little bit annoying from a perfectionist's point of view that it isn't slightly further left and more in the middle of the two buildings, but unfortunately we can't go back to the middle of the 18th century to have a word with the architects. Also, in this shot, I've got more of the background in because we're photographing from a higher vantage point, and therefore I've got more of these contrasting grasses in the foreground as well. And because of all that, I've decided to go with more standard landscape settings on the camera. I've gone with an aperture of f8, and by metering to keep my highlights perfectly exposed, with an ISO of 100, it's giving me a shutter speed of 640th of a second. I think this is another shot that might work quite well in black and white. So here's the finished edit, and we'll move on to our next shot. Now, you can't come to the rocking stone without photographing the rocking stone. With this next shot, I think we're going to have to go handheld again, because instead of photographing it just as it is, which I think would be quite boring, even though we had it in the last shot, I think it would look good if we photographed it from above. You'll see why in a moment. Now, it's probably not a good idea to climb rocks whilst you're holding a camera in your hands, but if I point the camera down at this rock, you can maybe now see why I thought it'd be interesting to photograph it from above, because the rain has washed these, well, weathered channels in the top of the rock, which is creating a really nice contrasty effect. So looking down from above, I think really gives a neat abstract perspective. I think if you went across to the side and shot along, then you'd start to pull too much mess into the background, whereas just photographing the textures on the rock I think works really quite nicely. So what I'm doing is I'm scanning round for an interesting pattern that will work well compositionally. I'm not looking for my foot that you can now see in frame. I'm looking at this curved aspect of the texture just in front of me now. And if I can position that in the frame so it circulates around that central point, then it's going to have the effect of circulating the eye around the composition rather than following one of these channels out of the frame. Again, with a boost of contrast and black and white, although this photograph could potentially have been taken anywhere, I think it just provides an alternative perspective on the rocking stone, and a reasonably interesting one as well. So with that, I've gone with f4 again, because there's no background to this, it's just one level, so everything's going to be pretty much in focus anyway, and a shutter speed of 640th of a second at ISO 100. I hope by sharing my decision making with you over those four very different compositions, it's helped you to realise that once you've made that initial decision of why you're photographing something in the first place, all of the subsequent decisions sort of interlock together to provide a bit of context and to connect that photograph with your audience, the people who are going to look at it. When it comes to decision making, one of the best places to start is working out who it is that you want to see your photographs and appreciate them, and what it is that you want to share through your photographs with them. Once you've made those decisions, then everything else should fall into place. And like with everything, practice makes perfect. Now, although it's clouding over here at Rocking Hall, I think I'm going to stick around and take a few more photographs. If you want to see some extra photographs that I've taken here today, then make sure that you're following Yorkshire Photo Walks on Instagram @PhotoWalksYorks. If you've enjoyed this video and got something out of it, then please give it a like and consider subscribing to the Yorkshire Photo Walks YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And maybe watch this video next. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, it's bye for now from me. Whoa, that was nice and comfortable by the wall. I'm going to have to walk off now.